Welcome to Redbeard Radio. I'm Brian Keith, and today we are talking about the solution to a big problem. The problem is that more and more, due to networked tribalism and similar problems, which we've just explored in depth with John Robb on this podcast, more and more people are being atomized, alienated, cut off from each other, and not feeling like they can really express to their friends and family who they are, not feeling like they have those networks that people really need to thrive. We have someone here today who has created a solution to this problem for all the women in the audience, but also if you're a man who has a wife and you're thinking, man, she really would thrive if she had a community of women who are really aspirational and really working on being their best selves, this episode is for you. Our guest today is Meseidy Rivera. And tell us, Meseidy, how did you come up with this idea for your new organization?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me on. I'm super excited to share about Liberta's Sisters. And I came up with the idea just because I myself had found over time that I was limited in what I could share with my friends. I was working in an industry that was very open with sharing, their thoughts and their views. And whenever I felt that I had something to contribute, I felt that either it wasn't probably the best time or it wasn't going to be well received, or I was just going to be told that that was not something that was valid. And I felt amongst a very small group, I had maybe 2 girlfriends that were also in the same space. And as we kept talking and sharing with each other, we realized that we had our own small little group and that we had more and more kind of pulled in and ended up with a lot of friendships, but they were all very superficial friendships. And so eventually I wanted to resolve that. I went first on my own looking for a group that I thought would work. One of my main things is that we didn't all have to agree to what certain solutions may be needed, but we had to all have certain established principles, a consensus of ideas, and that ultimately whatever we brought to the table was in order to move those principles, those ideas forward. And so that would allow a free exchange of conversation, of ideas, of things to be shared without one feeling that they had to censor what they were saying. So as I looked for these groups and I couldn't find it, or I would start to try and share in the 1 or 2 groups that I did find, I would immediately feel that there was an air of discomfort, and quickly the subject moved along. So then eventually, since I saw the void, I said the better solution would be for me to create it myself. And that's why I went ahead and formed Liberta's Sisters.
You're talking about diversity of thought, but not diversity of, let's call it, morality, that you're still identifying with people where you share a lot of the same values in terms of what is okay socially.
Absolutely.
And let's even look at sports, right? Like you can be okay with someone else who thinks your sports team is horrible, and you can think their sports team is horrible, and you can still be friends.
But they're all playing by the same rules.
Yeah. And there's an increasing number of topics where that's not okay anymore. Where if you like your dentist and I like my dentist, that's fine. But there's an increasing number of things like we're just not allowed to talk about them, because if you think something differently about this social policy or this political policy, suddenly we can't be friends anymore, which is not diversity of thought at all. That's complete conformity of thought. And you're solving that.
Absolutely. Well, that is my goal. And the main thing is that generally a group or communities, at least before, were formed on maybe a common interest. So either, I don't know, something general like knitting, backpacking, or you're networking as a business, or you're a mom, or whichever. And it was very superficial for a long time. Like that was kind of like the safe conversation to have. And now we're coming into environments where more complex ideas are being introduced. However, some ideas aren't welcomed. And then you feel like you no longer belong. You can no longer participate in that group. And you also start to realize that maybe there is an issue of character that needs to be considered. If at your core, you cannot come to a consensus of what is truth or what is a solid principle, and you continue to let it be malleable, then you're going to enter into a space of chaos and uncertainty, and you don't feel that you can be yourself. And so I really wanted to create a community of women that the goal here is that we all agree on established principles. They're on my website, they're dictated right up front from the get-go. And as long as you can agree to those principles, you are welcomed, because we can have an exchange, we can have a conversation, and then we also all have different life experiences, professions, stages of life that we can all learn and benefit from. So my goal is for it to be much more purposeful and much more in depth, because we're not hanging out together because we all knit or we're all, stay-at-home mothers. We're together because we agree that these pivotal, very important principles are necessary in order to be in a unified or civil society. And with that, we can form much more in-depth and much more purposeful relationships.
I love that you used the word consensus earlier. It makes me think of the episode I just released with John Robb, Why We Need a New Consensus Reality, where we talk for an hour about the problems and the reality that we've lost our consensus reality.
Yes.
And so with Libertas Sisters, you're building a new consensus reality, which you have to understand that your current consensus reality is broken or dead before you can see a need for building a new one. If you think that you still have one that works, then you don't need to build a new consensus reality. You don't even need to think about what one is. In that episode with John Robb, I gave the example of when I was a kid, everyone ate the same thing for breakfast. We all had cereal, wheat or corn cereal in milk.
Yes.
Everyone, as far as I know. Maybe someone else had bacon and eggs, those weirdos. But now I mostly carnivore diet and I have friends who are vegans. So we could have dinner together. Like, I guess they could bring their own food or I could bring my food to their house. But our consensus about what do you eat? It's gone.
Yeah, just very simple things like that. I mean, that's a very simple explanation. And then, I even shared recently an analogy. I shared it on my Instagram that if somebody says to me and asks me to babysit their puppy, I'm going to say yes, because I think I'm getting a puppy, but yet they drop off. And I mean, this is a very simple explanation, but they go and they drop off a lion. And I'm like, this is not what I signed up for. The lion comes in, it creates chaos, it creates destruction. And then if I'm lucky, I make it out with my life, or I only have one arm. Like, I would never have signed up for that if I knew what the reality was, what was being presented to me. And now we have a trend that is moving very quickly, that is redefining things that were agreed upon and that were understood for decades long. And it is a difficult world to maneuver in or to traverse if you don't know what the consensus is.
Well, let's talk about how you define words. When I go to the Libertas Sisters website, which is Libertas sisters.com, you say your purpose is to create a sisterhood of women who embrace strength and femininity. When you're using those words, let's create a consensus around what strength and femininity means in the context of Libertas Sisters.
Yeah, femininity is about embracing what is special and innate about women. I think that women have generally traits that are nurturing, that want to advocate, that are caring in one way or another, but there is an immense amount of strength in femininity. It's not the stereotype of femininity being, I wear long hair and dresses and love the color pink. If your listeners were to see me right now, I have an asymmetrical haircut, a tattoo, a nose piercing. You know what I mean? Like, I don't meet what people would see as like a stereotype of the 1950s or really the old school femininity. It's more about the principle of understanding and embracing what it means to be a woman. And then, advocating and understanding that femininity and masculinity are complementary to each other, that each one of them have their positive traits, and that if they're not, what's the word I'm looking for?
Well, they're not in conflict.
Yeah.
There's part of our society that is attempting to cast the war between the sexes.
Yeah.
We grew up our entire lives hearing that idea. And the idea that while there can be conflict between different people, that fundamentally that we are complementary. And they even think about, how is life created? Well, it's created from male and female energy, that you can't move forward as a species at a very basic level
Yeah.
without having both. And you just can't. You need both. It's critical.
Well, and then also the idea of trying to generalize anything being toxic or being negative, I see that that is like more of a mutation of just bad traits of individuals that might be specific to the sexes. For example, a man is much more physically stronger than a woman, and a woman has a tendency to much more thought and in touch with their emotions and their feelings. So when those things become distorted or they're used in an unhealthy way, they will present themselves in a unhealthy form. But that does not mean that anything about men is generally specifically toxic, or anything specifically about women is like, sometimes the word will be like manipulative. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I like what Jordan Peterson says here, which he talks about the big five personality traits and how across all cultures in the world, on average, men are more disagreeable on the agreeableness trait and women are more neurotic on the neurotic trait. And what Peterson says is, yeah, what this basically means is that men just have a harder time getting along in society, which is actually quite handy if men are going to be soldiers and hunters.
Yes.
And women tend to pay more attention to what could go wrong. And Jordan Peterson says that he's not unsure if, because he's going to hedge his bets, right? He's not unsure if a woman's whole psychology is not really just designed to keep an infant alive. And at all times, when she's not trying to keep an infant alive, she's a bit maladjusted to the world.
Absolutely.
Because if you can't keep infants alive, nothing else matters in the world. And then I'm going to take what he said further on the male side of things, which is that a guy is sort of designed to be at war, to be uncomfortable, miserable, and angry.
Yes.
And if he happens to not be at war, he's like, he has to try to adjust, like, oh, I'm not actually at war right now. I guess I should try to be nice. But, you know, if you're at war, it's pretty important to have guys who aren't very agreeable.
I think these two, I mean, as you're talking about this and as Peterson talked about this is essential in order to have a family, create and continue the line, because women, you know, they want to protect their children. They're fervent in that protection. They're fervent to advocate for their children. You know, there's a lot of strength in that. And that's where it comes from, embracing the strength of femininity. As a woman will traditionally or typically stay home and be that for their children on the home front, so to speak. A man's position would be to defend that home front, to be out there and make sure that everything's taken care of. And of course, this is in the most primitive kind of like, you know, language and sense, but that's essentially, you know, what our core is.
I saw a thing today, Meseidy, that I'd never seen, which is a woman leaf blowing a road when I was driving this morning. And I saw it and I thought, why does this feel weird to me? And I realized, right, I always see men with leaf blowers because the kind of guys who are out leaf blowing, it's just always men. And then I thought, okay, I bet she's leaf blowing the sidewalk in front of her business. I bet that's what's happening here. But it struck me as, right, this is one of those dirty, sort of dangerous jobs, leaf blowing next to a busy road. That's just a man's job. And we don't complain about it. We're not like, man, I really am unhappy that more men aren't getting hit by cars. It's just normal that a man does that. It's normal. And those men are probably a bit more disagreeable in that they're willing to take on a crappy job with a bit higher pay to do something dangerous.
I think one of the things that struck me the most that I saw, and of course, like, look, I love to leaf blow. I think it's a lot of fun, to be honest. But you know what I mean? Like, you know, there's exceptions and things to everything. But one of the things specifically about men willing to take on roles that are dangerous, there was a short video that went viral. I can't remember if it was on TikTok or Instagram. It probably crossed over. And it was an oil worker, a rig worker.
I love that video.
And he is like whipping that chain and making these adjustments. And I am just praying that the man does not lose a finger in the process. And first of all, I'm going to be the first to say, a woman should not be doing that job. A woman does not have the physical, biological strength to take on a position like that. It's just more likely than not, there is not a woman that can do that, because the amount of strength that is needed to do that in a quote safe, you know, way, because even watching that video did not look safe, but he was a professional. He knew what he was doing. And I was incredibly impressed with that. In fact, I probably watched that on a loop because I just was blown away.
I watched it a few times too, just to imagine, like, just to see that. And when you look at the number of fatality or high fatality jobs, at least in the United States, It's like logging, being a fisherman, all these things are held by men. But I want to circle back to Libertas Sisters, and specifically, I want you to connect the dots first. You've described what this tribe of the present looks like, but I want to hear you connect the dots to how you perceive women used to live in tribe back, however far back you want to go. And connect the dots first, because we know we've lost something.
Yes.
Somewhere we lost something, and you're trying to fix it. But help us understand, how is it before we lost whatever it was that we lost? And how is Libertas Sisters? Like, connect the dots first there.
Before, I had a great admiration where you look at things from the past, and women were a great deal of the community. And I think they still are today. I mean, even if you look at typically in a marriage or in a relationship, it's usually the wife or the girlfriend or the fiance that is like making the dinner plans, creating community, making friendships, because women are much more emotionally connected. We are much more communal in that sense. And I really admire how before you have the idea of like small villages or small towns, and all the women gathered together and they would teach each other skills. They would help raise each other's children. They would help each other solve problems. And I really wanted to kind of recreate that, because I believe two things happening now, or maybe three, between what happened with COVID, social media, and the internet. We're already individuals that have unnaturally allowed ourselves to become more secluded. And then on top of that, I believe that there is a characteristic of a person who is self-reliant and independently minded, who is a free thinker, so to speak, that has a tendency to be okay with that independence. So they have a tendency to not need community as much as someone who is maybe a little bit more extroverted and actually naturally does that. So I believe that women who are more independent minded and free thinkers, especially nowadays, we have a tendency to pull back and separate ourselves. And I think it's very important for us to go back and purposefully look for that community like it was in the past, where we taught each other things, where we shared ideas, skills, trade. My hope is eventually that as we have, like currently, my founding members are made up of some mothers that have homeschooled and have their children going off to college. And we also have a founding member who has young children and wants to do the homeschooling. And so right now, I want to pair those ladies together because she has no knowledge or understanding of how to start that off. And my other ladies, they do. And so they can help and sort of mentor each other through that. And so that is really just a small example. Even it's not just for women who are looking to homeschool or have small children. My hope is also that if you are a woman who is business minded, that we can find other women that have similar experiences that will help you move those businesses forward. As long as we can find things or projects that we can do together that will move the core principles of Libertas Sisters forward, I think it's a great thing to be able to create that community to do that.
Give me the vision of, let's say, a year from now or 5 years from now. How do you envision Libertas Sisters showing up in the lives of your members?
There's first of all the relationship. I think everything, when you start it with relationships and with community, it's much more natural and it's much more freeing. But in the long term, I want it to be a resource. And what I really want is to facilitate women to become better wives, better mothers, business owners, and to be able to create a network. If there is, for example, a void, or if there's information or something that you need, there will be someone within this community that will be able to help you move that dream forward, or help you through a difficult time too. If you're having a hard time with a work situation or a schooling situation with your children, I want it to be, first of all, based upon relationship, because the relationship will bind us together. That commonality, those principles will bind us together. And then we will be a resource to help you facilitate what you want to do in order to be a better wife, mother, and that will affect your community and that will ultimately affect the country.
That is a beautiful vision. Where can people go to sign up?
Well, you can go to my website, which you mentioned earlier, libertassisters.com, and that's spelled Libertas, sisters. On the website, there's the mission, the purpose, who we are, what we believe. There is a membership page, and there is an email sign up there. So, because I want to make sure that the community is well taken care of, I open up only a set amount of memberships. My goal is per month. We'll see how that goes as we grow. And they are first come, first serve basis. And you can choose what level of membership you want. And just so you know ahead of time, and a lot of people, you'll get an email on this, but there is an onboarding process. So you don't just sign up and you're just like let into the community. The idea is that, you'll read introductions on our founding members, on our fellow sisters. You'll learn about them. You'll find things in common. You'll be in a small, classroom where you'll have conversations with each other through a messaging app. You'll get to know the people that join with you. We'll have a face-to-face interview. You'll also interview some other members. It's for two reasons. It's so you can meet your members and create those relationships so you don't get overwhelmed with everything that we have to offer. And also just to make sure that we have people coming into the community that do support the principles on which the community is built on.
That sounds amazing. Folks, if you've heard me talk with John Robb about tribalism and the cure for the networked tribalism ill that's plaguing us, one of the things we talk about more and more is finding these small networks that you really can resonate with. We also talked about that with Michael Gimron in the Red Red Radio interview that he did. And we talk about increasing your empathy as the way to buffet yourself from all of the chaos that appears to be surrounding the world. So finding a small group of people who you can have deep empathy connections with is just the answer. Meseidy, thank you so much for being on the show. LibertasSisters.com, folks. That's the place to go to find out more. And Meseidy, I think we're going to be talking to you again soon.
Oh, great. I would love to do that again.